So, Lyndsey, could you tell the folks a little bit about your background and how you got to be here and working with as a therapist, psychedelics,
Yeah.
whatever you want to share?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's been kind of a long, windy life, I guess, in that way.
Yeah.
I was one of those super lucky kids. By 8, I knew I wanted to work in psychotherapy, and just felt such a deep connection when I worked with people one-on-one. I mean, I was a kid, but it was, like on the playground, connecting with classmates who were being bullied or, challenges that were coming up. I just always felt so heart-drawn to connecting with people when they were in their suffering, and didn't really know what exactly that was going to look like. I started auditing classes at the local community college and the local university when I was 15, 16, and just starting to sit in on like counseling courses and really just try to see, like, is this actually what I want to do? And I was disappointed. Like, I got to say, I was like disappointed in sitting in on some of these programs. I mean, functionally, like skills wise, it was, a lot of skill set teaching, but it was just missing soul for me. It was missing depth. And so I wasn't really clear, coming out of high school, moving into college, exactly what I wanted my career to look like. So I just studied everything. I took 7 years to complete my undergrad.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm like,
that's impressive.
Thanks. I'm like, I will never get this shot again to like be able to like deepen into education without, financial limitations or having a family or any of those things. So studied everything, psychology, sociology, anthropology. Was really interested into physics, art history, pre-med studies, and really just tried to see like where do I feel most drawn, like what collection of presentation feels the most interesting to me, what kind of hybrid modality looks the most interesting. And that was around the time that gene editing was just becoming available. And so I was really, really interested in behavioral genetics and had decided to go into a program in Holland at the New School. It was at that time, I believe, one of the only places in the world you could study behavioral genetics in a long-term format. Like, it was still considered unethical in the larger grand landscape. So like I wasn't able to find that in the US. Very synchronistically had met the head of that department on a train from Paris to Amsterdam. And so we had like a 7-hour train ride. He was like checking out me reading Chomsky, and we came over for a chat and learned more about like my experience and expertise. I learned more about what he was doing in his program, and it was just a perfect match. And so I went ahead and enrolled. But life has its own interesting way of unfolding. And as I was processing through with a friend who was going through a divorce, some challenges that she'd been experiencing, she was trying to decide, where do I want to move? What do I want to study? And by that point, I'd been studying Buddhism for about 10 years and, had a pretty solid practice. And I just said, I'm reading this book by this guy who started this school out in Colorado. It's in Boulder. Like, I don't even know where Boulder is in Colorado, but like, I don't know, let's go check it out. And we hopped on the desktop computers that were still at coffee shops at that time and went to go check out track back. Who was the guy? Where's the school? Found Naropa and she was in their eco-psychology program. And just for fun, I clicked on their contemplative psychotherapy program. And it was a knowing that I had never felt before. Like, this is home. I don't even need to look any further. I don't know what this means for my doctoral work, but like, I need to put a pin in that and really kind of explore what this.
You were in the doctoral program at the time?
That was the MS PhD conversion program in behavioral genetics. Yeah, so it was a dual hybrid program. Well, not hybrid, but I guess you would, progress through both master's and doctoral level, and took a hard swing to the right and came out to Boulder instead. And I mean, very like clinically focused. I was like a huge science nerd. Right. So finding balance and community at Naropa was just so invaluable. But it was outside of my scope of comfort in some ways. I had come up very strongly clinically, and this was much more, it's Buddhist psychology, it's a different perspective altogether. And so I had to work some of my own judgments and discomforts, and I basically just tell myself like, okay, just make it through the semester. If it gets too weird, you can always just, withdraw, go back to Holland, like you can go do that. And so always gave myself that out if it got a little too woo for me. And what I discovered was that it was perfectly and exactly what I needed. I mean, really gave me my own self-development and personal trauma recovery that I really, really needed to be able to be embodied in this world and not just stuck in my head and in the research. Yeah.
What a robust story. And you what an adventure Like literally, first of all, just reading Chomsky on a train is in Europe is just unique in its own right. But to go from this circuitous journey to a very cutting edge scientific field into this like very, I don't know, outside of center psychology space in an outside of center university, and in a very and Boulder in general is a pretty, you know, a different vibe altogether.
Totally altogether.
And there's range in that. There's real like human experience. And there seems like there's a lot of curiosity in your journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I have been so curious all my life. You know, I always wanted to be able to understand, like, how do things work? Why do they work the way that they do? When things aren't working the way that, you know, I would anticipate, like, what is that? What's that about? And, you know, in part, I think, so I'm an autistic woman. So I think like that neurodivergent.
Artistic or autistic?
Autistic and autistic. Yeah. So I guess both. But it allowed me like that neurodivergence. Yeah. Like,
and what, just, sorry, I'm just super curious. I mean, it's such an interesting label because when I think of autism, I think of people that are really, they struggle to relate. Really, right?
Yeah.
And you're very present. And at least to me, it seems like you're very related.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, what does that mean to you to be autistic?
Yes. So moving into relatedness, I had to get there through practices. So, I mean, it wasn't like a natural state for me. Yeah. For me, the way that I experience my autism is in much greater sensory awareness. Like I had always freaked my doctors out. I have a complex medical history as well. And then my doctor would be like, oh, so tell me about this, or what are you noticing there? And I'm like getting into like really granular detail of like somatic expression of different aspects of pain or illness or injury. And was repeatedly hearing from my like, you shouldn't be able to feel that. Like, how are you able to even sense that? Like, that should not be sensible, but it was. So like I experienced that wider range of sensory information that I really have to work with meditation and other practices to help modulate, because it can feel like there's this wide stream that can be very, very overwhelming. And before I knew how to work with it, I would experience that overwhelm and then I would just collapse up underneath it. You know, it was just like too blasted out. And so it kept my circle of my life pretty small and tight for a really long time, just because I couldn't understand why, you know, being in a relationship or being in social relationship was just so exhausting and just deeply, deeply taxing. So I really had to learn, like, what does my nervous system need? What does my whole self, like, what do I need to be able to show up in the world with curiosity, with openness, with warmth in a way that feels healthy and safe and connected for me. And so it was a super long journey to get there. It really only was after having my son, he'll be 3 on Thursday. And
exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you. And it was in seeing Jack, his neurodivergence start showing up around 18 months. And I'm like, okay, I had shame around how my neurodivergence would show up. And so it was really difficult for me to own up to that point. But then once I saw it presenting in my baby as well, I'm like, yeah, I owe this to him. He deserves to like have me not pushing this under the rug for myself. Like if it was just for me, like, yeah, I'm wounding myself in that way, but by not being so integrated, but I can't do that to him. I cannot do that to him. Like I owe him my own healing so that then I can help him navigate and walk through these spaces effectively.
Wow. So it's a useful pivot point. Something that I talked to you about originally. So I think you said that you didn't necessarily market to men, but most of your clients are men, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Never marketed once. No. Yeah. I've never utilized marketing for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Male clients just always found me.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just showed up that way. I mean, when I was in my internship, you know, I'm sure it got kind of moved in that way. I was working in the Boulder County Jail, and it was their first program that was really looking at trauma and addictions and how those co-arise together. Right. So it was almost exclusively like in the male pods. I didn't actually have any females that I was working with like during my internship year. But following that, that's just how the clinical work always moved forward. For whatever reason, I connected very, very effectively with men and helped them connect very effectively within themselves. And to be able to start repairing mostly what I saw as folks were coming in were challenges with alexithymia, just significant difficulty in being able to name and express those internal states. And without that language and that accessibility to it, it was just leaving these guys just trapped almost like in this whirlwind of distressing emotion and distressing sensation that they couldn't actually do anything with or functionally move. And so it was showing up in more self-destructive behaviors, variety of different ways, but all with that same focus of like, I just am trying to get away from this discomfort that I just can't access and I can't work with it.
So in your journey of being a clinician and working in a variety of different settings, and now a mom of a boy, you're seeing men in various states of being.
Yes.
And I'm wondering what you've discovered, some like themes about men and masculinity in the modern world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that like the primary theme that I see is that, how would I even say, and this isn't like a phrase that, and I'll be getting my clients to use directly, but basically like I don't have a space of belonging in them. Like I am here as a role, whatever that role looks like for them, whether it's as a provider, as a father, as, a doer. There's the role of the doer, whatever that doing meant, but robbed them of access to being. Like so much focus was on the doing and there was no groundwork, in early childhood, in childhood in general, perhaps also in adult relationships, for being to be an available state where men can have the ability to just rest in and get to know themselves from that energetic space so they can connect in with what they really want, who they really are, and how they actually want to be in the world, rather than following through on this autopilot of this role projection, whatever that role is.
Yeah. And how do you think psychedelics helps you sort of break through some of that conditioning?
Yeah, it's so Bessel van der Kolk and Rachel Yehuda, Dr. Yehuda, they both just published a piece a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's been
MDMA
about
one?
Yeah, it was part of the MDMA piece, and it was on alexithymia and demonstrating like that the psychedelics have the ability to repair that alexithymia, like from the frontal lobe all the way back through the limbic system and then into the, the back of the brain. That was always the primary barrier for clients that I worked with. Like it would take us so long for us to like literally build out that neural network, that neural connection, one neuron at a time,
Yes.
Arduous, doable with, as long as, a person has enough personal investment and like a willingness, totally doable. But it's hard, long work to start being able to build out that piece of the brain. And so when psychedelics became available and I started working with them with my clients several years ago, that was the first thing I noticed was that the alexithymia was resolving rapidly. 1 to 2 sessions of ketamine dosing. I mean, it wasn't taking long at all.
Wow, that's like nothing.
It's nothing. It's nothing, right? And then once...
Is that intravenous or the tablets?
So I worked with both. It really depended on, I meet my clients where they're at, and I work with a lot of folks who are very low income. So access was a major barrier. Luckily in Colorado, there's a local clinic that I partner with that does accept Medicaid. And so for like my clients who...
That's unusual.
It's Colorado's really progressive. I mean, in terms of the way we look at medicines, the way that we're looking at psychotherapy, the way that we dignify healthcare here is just different. And it's shifted. I mean, I moved out here 16 years ago. This was not the landscape back then, but I would say in the last 10 years or so, it's really, really shifted towards making sure folks have access to what they need, not just what they can afford. And so for my Medicaid folks, I could refer them over to this local clinic where they could go for IM work. But for folks who have traditional insurance, they don't cover it. And so we would have to look at other options because IM work would just usually be too far out of pocket for folks. So I would also work with lozenges because that was a much more effective price point. But I mean, we know from the research, it's not as bioavailable. It's not necessarily as effective. It's not that it's ineffective, but it pales in comparison to the efficacy of IM work. So it would really just vary it depending on what can folks afford? What do they have access to? What are they willing to do? And then we go from there and find a way out.
I want to go a little deeper into some other stuff, but I feel like what a perfect dovetail point to talk about what you're doing in this company that you're in now, because it's really unique in the psychedelic space. So don't know if you want to chat about that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's truly like a mission after my own heart. So TaraMind was formed in 2022, and we came on as a public benefit corporation with the sole mission of making life-changing mental health therapies accessible to all by crafting a supplemental insurance benefit plan design. So you can think about our offering similar to like vision insurance or dental insurance. It sits outside of the major medical, and large self-funded employers can choose to bring on this care program for their employees, specifically for treatment-resistant depression. And I mean, it's a total game changer. You know, we found out in the research last summer for folks with these treatment-resistant conditions, the fatty layer of the cell is changed. It's been shifted. You know, we don't know why exactly yet. You know, is it always like that? Was it genetic? Was that a variant that occurred over time? I don't know. But what we do know is that because of that fatty lipid layer, SSRIs, SNRIs, those molecules are too large to fit through. They literally just can't get through the cell. Whereas psychedelics, like my little boy would say, they're sneaky like a fox, and they're a much smaller molecule. They're much smaller molecule. And it's like those sweet little molecules just slide straight through, like thread through a needle. And so they're able to go in, activate that TRKB protein that proliferates that brain-derived neurotropic factor that then opens up, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. And so we have the ability to just work so much more effectively. So like for these folks, folks with treatment-resistant conditions, what they have in their current major medical plan will never work for them. It can't work, and it will never work. And so we have to start looking at some additional options. And ketamine-assisted therapy, I mean, compared to treatment as usual, exceptionally more effective. I mean, folks are hitting rates of remission inside of 6 weeks. It's exceptionally effective at a fraction of the price. And, for employers, it's a 3-to-1 return on their investment. I mean, nothing that they currently have in their clinical plan does that, in their healthcare plan. And so I would say the biggest hurdle so far has just been the social stigma and getting folks up to speed, like decision makers up to speed on the science of like why what they're currently doing, they're making strong gains of trying to add in these additional programs like EAP programs and other kinds of wellness programs to their insurance package design. But for this subsection of folks, 100 out of every 1,000 employees on average, they're going to be presenting with this treatment-resistant condition, and nothing that exists for them currently in their medical plan will ever touch it. It just won't. And, those are the folks who then carry a very high risk of suicide, very high risk of degeneration of social relationships, ability to cope, much more likely to slip into substance use disorders as a way to try to cope. It just creates this really vicious cycle that just doesn't have to exist. It doesn't have to be this way. Like the medicine's here, it's here now. We know dose and response. We know safety profiles. Like it's just asinine that we're not actually doing it yet.
So what do you say to people that are like, man, I don't know about ketamine. I know people do it at parties and stuff, and or someone said, I've done ketamine in the party space, and it's a hard drug.
Yeah.
What would you say? Or like, why would you take drugs to fix it? What would you say to folks like that?
Yeah. First of all, heard. I mean, like I was like not part of the psychedelic landscape. Like I came into this work in a harm reduction capacity after some of my clients with really severe trauma talked about their experiences at Burning Man. Like they came back into therapy after going down to Burning Man. They're like,
that's hilarious.
I don't know what happened, but like I took mushrooms and suddenly like my trauma is not haunting me. It's not haunting me right now. And like I am feeling more at ease, more spacious in my body. And I'm like, well, crap, like nothing that we've been doing has come anywhere close to that. Whether it's been through like EMDR, IFS, or SE work, adding in neurofeedback, working with different medication presentations, working with functional medicine, like nothing that was in my toolbox was able to do what that mushroom trip did in a matter of hours. And so I started getting super curious. And then interns, so I used to own a large practice here in Boulder. Between therapists and students, we had a team of about 70 before we ended up selling into a hospital as the pandemic was coming to a close. We were primarily a Medicaid-based clinic.
Wow.
And so I had
Medicaid
students.
therapy?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's brave. That's a real commitment to your accessibility out of that.
No, thank you. I mean, truly, like that's I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the Southern Midwest, where poverty is a way of life. And I mean, like, I haven't looked at the stats recently, but I think it was like 10 years ago, the county that I grew up in, the average income for a family of four was still just like $29,000 a year. So like, totally. And so like I saw very, very directly what happens for folks when they don't have access to financial resources, when housing resources can be limited, when being able to feed themselves and feed their families and clothe their families becomes stretched like to the limits, much less have access to psychotherapy. I mean, like that wasn't even part of the culture there. Like people didn't go. They just didn't go, and saw all of the pain and trauma that came as a result of that, because that area is also heavily military based. I mean, like growing up, everybody took the ASVAB. Like I had no idea that wasn't a normal thing until I moved away. It was like, oh, hey, what was your ASVAB? Like, what did they say you should do for a career? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh,
I don't even, okay, for people that are not in the military, what the hell is that?
Yeah. It's like a military entrance exam. That looks at, think of it as like a career counseling exam, where it really kind of looks at what are your strengths, what are your skills, where would you most likely be successful in the service.
That's what happened out. That's like, that was a man grew up on the East Coast. That don't even show up. But that's culture. That's the culture that you grew up in.
Yes. And so then bringing that back into Boulder and seeing that, like, yeah, it's just a super, super affluent area. And there's a ton of people who live on the margin, and their access into high quality mental health care, it wasn't dignified. I mean, like clients would try to get on a waiting list, maybe waiting for 9 months to a year to be able to get in to see a provider who accepted their insurance. And it just infuriated me. So I was like noticing those patterns. And then at the same time, I was moving into my own practice, and I had colleagues who were wanting to work together and work under my Medicaid license or under my Medicaid contract. But they just didn't understand, like they didn't know how to do the business of the business. Like that's just not where their skill was, but I could do it. So I'm like, oh, well, come on over and like, we'll just, grassroots effort to just start uplifting our community with really, really high quality, somatically integrated trauma work and substance use work. And so we just never did. I mean, never had to file, like advertise anything. Like through word of mouth alone, we just became like the standard, or one of the standards in the area for really high quality trauma and substance abuse work.
That's a definitely unique story. So many different directions. But I was thinking about what you said about, I've been to Burning Man a bunch of times, been around that culture. And so it made me think about sort of what you were saying, set and setting. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So here's my question. Here's sort of like integrate sort of stuff. So you have men belonging. Right?
Yes.
So we address some of the like physiological issues that are happening from chronic stress trauma. How do you engage with them in the underlying cultural obstacles of like what you said was just so, I was like, there's not really a space of belonging. There isn't like these kinds of communities where like men would go and now I'm a more open person. Now let me find a couple other dudes that are also very open. That's unusual.
Yes.
And so what did you do with that when you have these guys that have all these insights?
Yeah.
But then you got to go back into the world where it's like, be provider, your worthiness is based on your money, power, status.
Totally. So I would say the first stage in the trajectory is learning to belong to themselves.
Oh, beat.
Yep.
Okay.
And so once that piece is established, that sense of I do belong in this world, I do belong in this body, and I do have something so much more to offer than materialistically what I can provide. And so like really deepening into that self-confidence, that self-knowing. And it's so interesting because like, I don't know, I'm assuming it's, I know it's this way in the vets community, assuming, this is also part of how it's happening. You just did with civilian males as well. But they would just start referring their friends and they're like, go see her. Like, she's like figured this piece out, like, is able to like walk with me in these states and in these places that, I may not have been able to find that kind of therapeutic alliance previously. So, I mean, it was kind of like self-feeding community that started building, and so whether it was hosting groups at the clinic or friends who would just come in for episodes of like PAT care or, longer trauma-based care, depending on what the need was. But they were finding each other and then referring back to each other I'd have spouses, partners coming in. We would be doing like family-based work as folks are recovering. These men are recovering from whatever the symptoms were, whatever that block was. It's trauma, stress, operator syndrome, MDD. Whatever it was that was showing up. I always include those relational patterns, because as one person changes, the whole system changes and has to be able to like move and flex together to adopt like this new way of being. And in the ketamine work, things are shifting fast. Like in traditional psychotherapy, we're making shifts, but it's long and slow. Right. So it's often not to the level of like conscious awareness that the whole system and the family system is really noticing it all at once. So there's a much more easeful transition into a different change state of being for the man that I'm working with within his network. The psychedelics are very different. As we move into the medicine and choose that inward focus, and that's really what makes that difference between like, using medicines like in a party sense of like being out at the club or, in different places versus working with the intentionality of turning inward as we go into the medicine space. That makes a profound difference. And so when we are holding the sanctity of that work, of saying like, hey, we're going to partner with this medicine, it will be me and you and ketamine, and we're just going to walk into this space together and let's see what emerges. Let's see what's there. Really helping men recognize that like, no, you do have a lot that's going on in here. Like you may have been socially told like, oh, like I just don't feel things in the same way, or I'm just not sensitive, or I just don't feel at all. I just feel numb.
Yeah.
We start waking up that internal sensorium and starting to build in, respectful, tender relationship with these internalized states, almost like protecting them. This is an image that came up from a different client, a female client with really, really severe developmental trauma. But that's the image that just came to mind now, is like seeing this nest in a fireplace and these like really fragile little eggs sitting inside. And like that we're really here, like birthing the tenderness of these unbirthed parts, these aspects of self that have just remained in regression, locked out forever, most of the guys I work with, and creating a haven for them to be able to be birthed into within themselves, then within the therapeutic relationship, then within their family systems, then within their friendships, and then within their larger community.
That's a beautiful metaphor. Oof, I'm just gonna, whoa, wow.
Helping them see you always belong, always. You just couldn't access the part that knew that.
What would you suggest? I feel it's like, I remember talking to you at the conference, and also now it's like, being in your presence, there's just such a openness and confidence. What would you say? What do you suggest for people working with men that might not necessarily be trained in like your traditional setting? What are some things you look for in engaging with men to help them be more open, committed to their own healing process?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to setting the container back at the very beginning of work and really making it clear. Like I let my clients know from the very start, like I am not afraid of hard places. I am not afraid of dark things. Anything and everything that you have experienced that you choose to bring into the space is always welcome here. You and all parts of you are always welcome here. We can talk about high risk situations. We can talk about really scary things. And I'm going to be right here with you every single step of the way. So I very verbally like announce that commitment. And then I demonstrate that commitment over and over and over again so that the nervous system of my client can begin to start to receive that knowing, receive that limbic resonance. And so like that's a skill I really lean heavily on, is maintaining limbic resonance throughout the course of the work together and really helping clients to begin to recognize that within themselves. And so it's really gentle pointing out instructions in the beginning. It's, hearing someone sharing something perhaps in an intake, and then I'll reflect back. Like I noticed as you were naming that, I noticed like your breath kind of collapsed a bit. Can you try just leaning into that chest space just for a moment and see what you notice there? Or I noticed that as you were saying one thing, but at your micro expressions, you were saying, something in maybe a curious or humorous way, but at the same time, the micro expressions I noticed came forward demonstrating a lot of pain. Like, I'm curious, is there more happening there? Can we go investigate that for a moment? So it's taking these like little side roads into integrating somatic awareness in and out of every session. And then as that becomes a standard way of working, and the client recognizes like, yep, it's full body. Like if we're only doing talk-based therapy, we're missing, like, in my opinion, like 80% of the work. And we might be able to like clear and neutralize memories, but the body is still holding all that unspent trauma. It is still holding all of that cellular energy that is keeping folks in this neuro habituated signature of a stress response. And so they're not actually going to get fully better. Their mind might be clearer, but their body is still going to be in distress, and they're still going to be experiencing those somatic symptoms.
I wonder, so for you, what is maintaining limbic resonance mean to you?
Yeah. So for me, that means learning how to feel myself in relationship with whomever I'm working with. So it really starts with, in that very first session or the chemistry call, depending on how we connect, really like knowing my own internal body state and knowing what's mine and not mine. So with the contemplative psychotherapy department at Europa, we would have meditation was a standard part of the practice. I mean, we would meditate for 10 minutes at the start of every class. We had an assignment of, I believe it was like 5 or 6 hours of meditation a week for 3 years that we would turn in our logs about. And then,
wow.
Right. And then yearly, the first year is a month-long mostly silent meditation retreat. Year 2 is another Datsun month-long process. And then third year is a week-long. We don't get to go quite as long because everybody's in internship then, and you can't really take a month off from your caseload. So we had to have a different transition. So it was a lot of meditation.
Wow.
And so I got to know, what does my countertransference feel like? Like, what are these flavors? What's behind that? What do I need to clear in my own system to be a most effective, limbic resonance vessel for the clients that I'm here to walk with? So it really took a dedicated practice. And then I would start bringing, like an internship, I started with this practice in once a week in meditation, where I would bring forward the images and the stories of my clients into my meditation session. And so I would like if you were my client, I would, bring in this image of you and the felt experience of what it's been like to work with you and the story that you're coming in with. And then I would just sit with that in open shamatha vipassana and start seeing in my own internal landscape what emerges. Like, what's the wisdom? What's the pathway through here? Like, what is Michael's nervous system telling me about how he experiences the world? And so then when I'm back in session with folks later that week, I'm continuing to listen and see, like, how is your nervous system showing up for me today? What kind of symbols, images, metaphors are really coming forward? And then how can we actually make those tangible? So this was long before I got into medicine work. Medicine work makes that so much more effective. I mean, just like it's so much more rapid. So there isn't like this, I guess I see it as like slower foundational building in treatment as usual. Even this more like Buddhist psychology kind of treatment as usual. It's just a slower building process. But with psychedelics, we can move right into that limbic resonance really, really rapidly. Like as soon as that alexithymia is starting to clear and people are actually able to access their bodies, we can find that nervous system resonance really effectively. And then I teach folks how to feel into these states and how to start naming and exploring what these sensations are, being able to like really label them if that's helpful for them. Like with more like language around like symptoms or, different ways to express what's happening essentially.
I feel like since you've used alexithymia a lot, and yeah. I think it's so useful to what is the definition for you of alexithymia? Because it seems like you've seen it a lot in the men you've worked with.
Absolutely. Yeah. The definition for me is, what am I seeing? I'm like seeing something in my internal sight right now. And it's like upstairs, all the lights are on, like everybody's home, but there's like no capacity to connect in to the sense of self on that limbic level of engagement with the self, and then on the subconscious and down into the somatic. Like, so like I'll be assessing for that as I'm working with someone, and I'll be asking, like as you're sharing this experience, I can hear the pain in your voice. Can you tap into where you experience that in your body? And they're like, nope, I got nothing. Like there's no feedback there. There's just like no feedback that exists. They can feel the tension. They can feel unwellness, like however they might phrase, that sense of unwellness, whether it's overwhelm or anger or agitation or irritability, like those are the key ones I usually hear. But when it comes to being able to access it and describe it or work with it, in any kind of like functional way, that skill just isn't present. It's just not there. And I mean, like socially, we know, neuroscience wise, we know that corpus callosum in children who are assigned female at birth, like there's a much denser neural circuitry in that corpus callosum. It's like for girls and women, we are born with this like, I don't know, 10-lane heated, well-lit superhighway between that right orbital cortex and our language centers in the left orbital cortex. So there's a lot more neural networking that's available, but there's also a lot of social conditioning that allows girls and women to be able to like speak to these things and really deepen in that self-awareness. For boys and men, especially those who were exposed to developmental high stress events and trauma in their systems, if you think back, like that lower right brain, that aspect of that brain is pretty much all that's online for like quite a long time. And the corpus callosum networking in infant boys and young boys just isn't as dense. And there's not the social reinforcement to like put that language in place. So it's kind of like an atrophied system in some ways. So that's what I'm assessing for. I'm like, how atrophied is this bridge? Like what kind of tools are we going to need to use to be able to highlight that lower right orbital cortex, bring up that content, walk it across the corpus callosum, connect in with language, and then up into the frontal lobe to make meaning out of all this experience. And so that was really the trajectory I would see, is like I would be assessing for like how suppressed is that bridge? What kind of work do we need to do to really kind of fill that out and like fill out the template so that folks can then effectively move through an EMDR process, or more effectively move through like somatic experiencing. But the medicines really just kind of take us right there. It's really profound. I mean, there's still the work of like building the language. How do I describe this? What does this mean? But it's totally possible. I mean, I've been doing this work because of the alexithymia, like with my son, since about 18 months old. You know, I'd be working with him on like, where do you feel that in your body? You know, what color is it? Does it feel spiky? Does it feel smooth? Does it want to do something? Is there an impulse? And so grateful for that. So like as my kiddo's moving into like what we lovingly call the three-nager stage, where everything's no and tantrums, tantrums out.
Yes.
And so it's about coming forward.
Uh-huh.
You know, I can talk with Jackie and, you know, he'll be like having a rough transition between, you know, when it's time to go to bed and like turning off the lights and everything and getting ready. And it can be like now it's a 30-second event. You know, it's a 30-second event where he is like, I'm mad and I want to kick my floor, you know, I want to kick my mattress and I want to hit my arms. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Like feel the mad, let that mad move through. He's like, it's red and rising temperature and it's spiky. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Like,
wow.
It's moving, get it out. I'm here for you. Like, it's okay to feel this. It's okay to process this. Like transitions are hard and I'm here. You're not doing this alone, you know, and then he peeks and then rolls eyed out and then he turns over, grabs his blanket, I rub his chest, and he drifts off to sleep. And I feel really confident in that, in being able to raise him in that way, that he knows what's happening for himself. He knows what feels okay. He knows what doesn't feel okay. He knows how to set boundaries within himself and with others. And it really gives me the understanding and clarity that like, yeah, so boys and men can be born with, you know, more challenged corpus callosum density issues, and we can actively, very effectively build that back out. Like this is not like a lifetime limitation. It's a state that just needs to be supported to be able to grow and proliferate more effectively.
It sounds like building, develop, like also engaging in cultural conversations in which we talk about the impact of the way we nurture boys developmentally to I would say, I forget, somebody wrote this book about boys are traumatized out of their hearts.
Right? Yes.
And then they become men with what you could say alexithymia, right?
Yes.
No access to their feelings.
Yeah.
And it's like, I wonder, you know, what would you suggest for people raising boys with intense feelings? And the reflection, I feel like, the reflection on the parent of like, oh my gosh, these are really intense feelings that I don't like.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Totally. Well, and recognizing that that's also the countertransfer.
Yes.
You know, that's
right.
Recognizing that, like,
culture.
yes, like totally. Well, and it comes down to, I think, one, taking away the stigma that like, or the, you know, the cultural belief that like, this is just how boys are. Like, no, this is not just how boys are. Like, this is what happens when we don't teach young boys how to connect in with their bodies and their emotions. Like, this isn't necessarily natural state. This is their natural state without emotional and somatic intelligence. Like, that's really what we're seeing. And so then how do we work with emotional and somatic intelligence? And I think it's a systems issue. Like, parents have to be willing to tolerate their own distress, recognizing how this shows up in their mind, and like taking, because it's not my toddler's responsibility to manage my emotions. It's my responsibility to understand, like, okay, I'm tired, I'm maxed out, I'm, in whatever state that I'm in. Let me regulate around that and then connect in with my little one who needs that co-regulation. He needs that limbic resonance for him to be able to navigate through this successfully. But it's very, very doable. And I pull from, primarily it's SE concepts. Like, what's the emotion if you can name it? Where do you
experiencing? You're saying SE?
Yeah, somatic experience.
Okay.
Yeah, and so like just as like walking through with Jackie, he'll be like, okay, Baba, like what is this emotion? And then he finds like the most fitting word for whatever that flavor is that he's experiencing of distress. And I'm like, okay, where do you feel it in your body? And he'll just point. It's like my chest. Like, okay, noticing that mat that's in your chest. Does it have a color? He's like, yeah, it's bright red. What does it feel like? Does it feel like energy moving smoothly? Or does it feel super spiky? So I'll usually just give like 2 to 3 options, and then he self-selects into what it feels most like. Then I ask about temperature, because I want to be assessing for like, is he tipping over into like dissociation at all? Like, how maxed out is he? Where is he at on his own barometer? So like the hot emotions versus the cool emotions or sensations. And then I just ask him, like, Bubba, what does your body want to do with it? Do you want to breathe it out like a dragon? Do you want to kick on your mattress? Do you want to punch on your pillow that's on your bed? And he'll self-select. And like, he knows he's not getting othered as a result of this. Like, he's not bad, or made to feel like he's bad for having big feelings, because 100% of the humans have big feelings. We all do. That's not a problem. It's how we respond to those feelings that can be problematic. And so I'm trying to teach him with just the most effective skills so that he can make sense out of what's going on, not get overwhelmed by it, and keep his heart open to the process.
I wonder is that part of what makes your approach so engaging to men, as you invite them into their big feelings?
Yeah, I think so. That like, I'm not afraid to go there, and I'm not I don't judge them, like it is okay to have big, loud, scary, overwhelming feelings. That's all welcome, always. Not okay to like act them out in terms of like harming themselves or harming someone else. But we start building in that gap, right? So that they can experience, here's what's happening in my body. Here's how it's showing up in my mind, either with real memories or symbolic imagery. And then how do we want to move this and relate to this? Like, what does this need to look like for the ability to just self-manage, in relationship, this big experience that's happening? And then without fail, over time, it diminishes. Just like with my kiddo, like, folks just need the time and the space and the unconditional love and acceptance to know that like all of you is always welcome here. 100% of the time, 100% of the time. Nothing is off. Yeah.
That's powerful.
Absolutely. Because if we're only saying like only your good parts can exist here, I am just perpetuating the cultural stigma of like, you have to be, show up in a certain way or be this certain person or have certain characteristics to be valuable as a human being. And that's a bunch of crap. Accurate. And it keeps stuck.
Totally. So in terms of wrapping up, what is one thing you suggest to men outside of therapy for them to like cultivate their own just self-knowing, self-healing?
Yeah. I would say looking to resources that craft a sense of safety in your body. Whether this is, reading about other men who have found their own paths towards healing and like hearing about their stories, whether it is about like getting out into nature and really giving yourself an opportunity to just experience raw awareness as best as you can, just finding ways to connect and relate in with yourself, whatever that looks like, whatever pathway feels the safest and the most comfortable. Like no part of trying to like repair or heal alexithymia is comfortable by its very nature. It's stress in the nervous system. That's not going to feel comfortable. But how can you
Yes.
cleaner that allows you to hold the discomfort, coming to know that it's temporary, and that healing is actually possible, and that you're worth that healing. You're worth healing. You're worth feeling and healing your entire self.
Beautiful. And finally, I don't know if this is like possible yet. How would somebody find out about Power Mind? Is that still like in the like micro stages, or is that something that the general public can access yet?
So we are launching with our first employer June 1st, actually. So a little over a week. So we will be, thank you. We'll be starting with our first employer. It's a small self-funded employer that will give us a chance to really pressure test our systems, because we're in all 50 states.
Right.
We have a lot of technology that supports our delivery of this care. And so we need an opportunity to really make sure like what needs to be broken, and then how can we fix it? And then over the course of the summer, we'll be bringing on 2 other self-funded employers to keep just expanding, testing those workflows. But we're going live with national self-funded employers in September. And so ideally, I'm like, really like, this is the time, like employers, like, please come help your people, please, because these tools work. They work so effectively. They work so efficiently. And your members, they deserve access to this kind of healing, and they're not going to be able to get it most likely in any other way. I mean, a round of ketamine treatments, including the psychotherapy, it can be around $6,000. And like, people just don't, generally speaking, have access to that kind of funding. But when you know that inside of one session, people can start experiencing tremendous relief from suicidal ideation, feeling trapped and closed in their bodies, like freedom exists. It's right here. It's very available. We just have to get folks educated to start bringing the service on for their employees.
Amazing. Wow, what an adventure. I'm so glad that you made the time to have this conversation. It was a real privilege and a gift.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. I mean, truly, I just like so enjoyed connecting with you at the conference. And every time we would, come back into conversation, it just felt like, there's something really meaningful here, and I really want to follow up with you. And so thank you for having me. It's truly such an honor.
Yeah, I mean, wow, you really you embody wisdom that is I just talked to so many people in the world and in this field, and it's not just the words you say, it's the way you carry yourself, and now that you told me a little bit about your story, I was like, oh, you really live. And there's a huge a fighter in you to find yourself, and that all you embody and carry, and that makes a lot more sense.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Thank you for seeing me. Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Well, you're welcome. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to talk soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Michael. Take good care.
Okay.